I had just landed from the final flight after 5 straight days floating in the sky. From New York to London and then looping back to Chicago. My name is Dominic Young, a 35-year-old flight attendant. I'm used to packed schedules like this, but this time was different. My body was utterly exhausted, my eyes stung from lack of sleep, and my back ached terribly from constantly bending over to serve passengers. All I wanted was to go home, not the small apartment in Chicago, but the house in Naperville where my parents live. I pictured the whole family gathered around the dinner table, my mother, Linda, making my favorite roasted meat, my father, Robert, telling old stories, and me being able to forget all the fatigue in the warm embrace of my family. That was why I decided to drive straight from the airport there, even though I was completely drained. The highway to Naperville was so familiar that I could drive it without needing to look at the signs. The cold December wind rushed in through the slightly open window, carrying the smell of light rain mixed with exhaust fumes. The car turned into the familiar neighborhood, wooden houses with white picket fences and lush green trees. My heart beat a little faster with excitement. But when the car stopped in front of the gate, everything suddenly fell silent. The iron gate was locked, with a dangling chain and the old padlock that my father rarely ever used. The front yard was pitch black, not a single light on. Normally, my mother always turned on the porch light from dusk, like a quiet welcome for anyone who might visit. I turned off the engine and sat still in the dark cabin, my eyes fixed through the windshield to observe. There was no sign of life, no barking dog, no flickering light from the living room window, and even my father's old van had disappeared from the garage. I reassured myself. Maybe Mom and Dad went to visit relatives or they're out for dinner. It's fine. But deep down, a strange premonition began to creep in. I had never seen the house like this, not even when I hadn't called ahead. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket, my hands trembling slightly from the cold and exhaustion. The screen lit up, and I dialed my father's number, Robert Young. The ringtone went on and on. 1 ring, 2 rings, then 5. No one answered. My heart started pounding harder. Is Dad driving? Or did he leave his phone at home? I tried again, but it was still just the hopeless beeping sound. Then I called my mother. Her number, the one I've known by heart since I was little. The phone rang and rang like an echo in the void. No answer. I called again and again, each wait stretching out like centuries. Now the gut feeling was clear. This wasn't a normal absence. My parents weren't the type to ignore their phones, especially knowing I might call at any time before my flights. My throat felt dry, cold sweat breaking out despite the chilly weather. What the hell is going on? I muttered to myself, gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I stepped out of the car. The cold wind slapped my face like a knife. The neighborhood was quiet, only the rustling of leaves under my feet. I walked over to the next-door neighbor's house, Mrs. Ruth Anderson, a widowed elderly lady who had lived here since before I was born. She was always friendly and often brought cookies to our house during holidays. I knocked on the door. The sound echoed in the night. It took a while before she opened it, wearing a bathrobe, her glasses slipping down her nose. Dominic, you're back? Why are you here so late? She sounded surprised, her voice slightly shaky with age. Hello, Mrs. Ruth. I'm sorry to bother you, but I can't reach my parents. Have you seen them? The house is completely dark and the gate is locked. Mrs. Ruth looked at me, then glanced toward our house, her expression changing. She sighed and pulled me onto the porch to shield us from the wind. Dominic, I don't know how to say this. A few days ago, I saw your parents packing up their things. They loaded them into the old van and drove off. When I asked, they just smiled sadly and said they were leaving temporarily. I thought something was wrong, but I didn't dare ask more. Her words hit me like a thunderbolt. I stood frozen, my brain struggling to process the information. Packing up? Do you know where they went? They didn't say anything to me at all? She shook her head, stroking the edge of her robe. No, dear, they just said they had to go. But this morning, when I went shopping at the supermarket a few blocks away, I saw that van parked in a hidden corner. I'm not sure if it's still there, but it looked just like it. peeling paint, dusty windows. I felt the blood rush to my head, my ears ringing. Shocked, completely bewildered. My parents, elderly people, why would they pack up and leave like that? What could be so serious that they didn't call me? I tried to press Mrs. Ruth for more details, but she just shook her head, saying she didn't know anything else. I'm sorry, dear. That's all I saw. You should try checking the supermarket. I thanked her in a near-dazed state, my mind spinning. I returned to the car, my hands shaking as I inserted the key. My heart pounded like war drums, my mind blank except for a vague fear. The supermarket wasn't far, just a few minutes' drive, but that stretch felt endless. I imagined all sorts of things. An accident, illness, or worse, someone forcing them. No, that can't be, I told myself, but my grip on the steering wheel tightened. When I arrived, the supermarket was closed, the parking lot sparsely lit under the yellowish streetlights. I drove slowly, scanning everywhere. Then, in a secluded corner behind a row of abandoned shopping carts, I saw it. The family's old van. Green paint peeling in patches, windows covered in dust, tires worn down. My heart constricted. I parked beside it, got out, my legs heavy as lead. The night air was bitterly cold, but sweat still poured out. I approached, my hand touching the door. The cold metal piercing through my skin. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open. It creaked loudly, and immediately a musty, stifling smell hit me in the face. Inside was pitch dark, but under the faint streetlight filtering in, I saw them. Robert and Linda sitting close together on the back seat, heads bowed, eating dry pieces of bread. They looked gaunt compared to how I remembered them, clothes wrinkled, faces hollow in the dim light. The space inside the van was suffocatingly cramped. Just a few personal bags, hastily folded clothes, a couple of water bottles, expired boxes of crackers, and an old blanket. Nothing else. This wasn't a trip, it was a life of wandering. I stood frozen, unable to speak. A wave of pain surged through me, mixed with overwhelming guilt. While I had been flying between cities, smiling at passengers, enjoying meals on the plane, my parents, the people who had sacrificed their entire lives for me, were living like homeless people in this very old van. How could this happen? Why didn't they call me? I wanted to scream, to cry, but my throat choked up. My parents looked up at me, their eyes weary. They said nothing, just lowered their heads silently. My mother bit her lip, clutching the piece of bread tightly. My father sighed, his shoulders slumping. I wanted to demand answers, to know what had driven them to this point, but seeing their situation, the shame and exhaustion on their faces, I couldn't bring myself to question them. I could only stand there, tears streaming down my cheeks, and whisper, "Mom, Dad, I'm home." But in that moment I knew the peaceful life I had dreamed of was shattered, and the nightmare had only just begun. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure amid the skin-cutting cold of the late night. The supermarket parking lot was deserted, only the howling wind whistling through the flickering streetlights. I couldn't leave my parents there for another second. "Mom, Dad, let me help you out," I said softly, my voice trembling. I reached into the van, grasping my mother's arm first. She was light as a feather, like a ghost, her skin ice-cold from the chill seeping through the thin van windows. Mom stepped out, her legs a bit unsteady, and I had to hold her tightly to keep her from falling. Then it was Dad's turn. He was heavier, but his legs shook as if his strength had been drained long ago. He took my hand, squeezing it lightly, but he didn't look me in the eye, perhaps out of shame or fear that I'd see the pain in them. We walked toward my car, a heavy silence enveloping us like a fog. I opened the back door, helped my parents settle in, then quickly gathered the few bags from the van, those pitiful, meager belongings. A few old sets of clothes, a thermos, and the remaining dry bread. My heart tightened at the thought of them living like this for days. How long had it been? A week? 2 weeks? And I, their grown son, had been soaring high in the skies, completely oblivious. Guilt surged through me like a crashing wave, making me want to scream. But I bit my tongue, started the engine, and drove off into the night. The entire drive back to Chicago, no one said a word. The steady hum of the engine mixed with the faint murmur of the local radio station, but no one was listening. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw my parents sitting close together, staring out into the pitch-black windows. Tension filled the cramped space of my old sedan like a ticking time bomb. I could clearly sense their shame. My father, the man who had once taken pride in the home he built with his own sweat and tears, now reduced to wandering. My mother, the gentle homemaker, now huddled like a lost child. And me? I just gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying not to let more tears fall. A bad premonition crept in, but I pushed it away, focusing on driving safely. By the time we reached my apartment in downtown Chicago, it was very late, nearly midnight. The old building with its flickering neon hallway lights wasn't much, but at least it was warm. I parked in the underground garage, then helped my parents into the elevator. Mom leaned on me, breathing heavily from exhaustion. Dad walked slowly, clutching the bags as if afraid to drop them. I unlocked the apartment door, a small space with a living room that doubled as the kitchen, one bedroom, and a balcony overlooking the street. I turned on the lights, and warm yellow glow flooded the room, chasing away some of the darkness. Then I cranked the heater to its highest setting, the hot air fan humming loudly. "Mom, Dad, sit here," I said, guiding them to the old sofa. I grabbed blankets from the closet, wrapping them tightly around Mom, then Dad. They sat down, their bodies hunched, looking pitifully small. I didn't wait any longer and rushed to the kitchen to quickly make a pot of soup. Luckily, the fridge still had some vegetables and chicken from last week. I chopped quickly, threw everything into the pot, brought it to a boil with a bit of salt and seasoning. The aroma of food spread, making the room feel less cold. While it simmered, I brewed 2 cups of hot tea, adding a touch of honey to make it easier to drink. When I brought it out, my parents looked at me with eyes full of hesitation, mixed with shame and fear. They ate slowly, their hands trembling slightly from the cold and fatigue. Mom sipped each spoonful of soup as if she hadn't had anything hot in ages. Dad drank the tea, the warmth relaxing him a little. But I could see clearly they were hiding something. Their evasive glances, tightly pressed lips, as if speaking would make everything worse. I sat down across from them, no more beating around the bush. "Mom, Dad, tell me, why were you living in the van like that? What happened?" My voice was calm, but my heart pounded wildly, anxiously awaiting their answer. They looked at each other, then Mom sighed. "Son, our house, it's been sold." Her words stabbed me in the chest like a knife. Even though I had partly guessed, from Mrs. Ruth's words from the van, hearing it confirmed made my heart constrict. The pain inside me rose sharply, like acid corroding everything. The house in Naperville, where I grew up, with Mom's rose-filled backyard garden, the garage where Dad taught me to fix cars, the living room with family photos. All gone. I swallowed hard, my voice hoarse. "Who sold the house? Did you sign the papers? The house is in my name." Dad interrupted, his voice weary. "Calm down, son. Let me explain from the beginning." He hesitated, then recounted in a halting voice. A few days earlier, my younger brother, Lucas Young, had brought a group of strangers to the house. They claimed to be buyers, carrying paperwork, talking about ownership rights. They demanded that my parents pack up immediately because the transaction was complete. My parents panicked. Those strangers were cold and threatened to call the police if they didn't leave. My parents were left with no choice but to load their things into the van and go. Each word from Mom was like a sharp shard cutting straight into my heart. Anger rose in waves, burning hot, making my blood boil. Lucas again, the little brother I had once protected, whom I believed could change. Old memories flooded back, gambling, debts, the times he nearly dragged the whole family into the abyss. Back then, I was the one who stepped up, emptying my savings, borrowing more to buy a new house for my parents, and putting it in my name to protect them. Yet this time, he sold the house I bought for them. How could he do that? Did Lucas really do this? What right did he have? I growled, my fists clenching until my knuckles turned white. Mom quickly tried to calm me, her voice trembling. "Son, don't get angry. He must have had his reasons. After all, you two are blood brothers. Don't make a big deal out of it, or our family will fall apart." But those words only fueled my rage even more. For years I had chosen silence, chosen sacrifice, just to keep the family intact. And this was the result: my parents wandering homeless because of the child they loved most. My patience had reached its limit. I stood up abruptly, no longer willing to accept any more evasion or protection. I said firmly, "I have to go see him right now." My parents looked at me worriedly but didn't stop me. I left the apartment in a state of tension, my heart pounding as if it might explode. The Chicago night was bitterly cold, wind howling through the skyscrapers, but I felt nothing except the anger. I drove straight to the place Lucas was renting, a cheap apartment complex on the outskirts where I had visited a few times to check on him. The drive was long, but my mind was filled only with images. Lucas smiling, making promises, then betraying us again. When I arrived, I parked in front of the rundown building, dim streetlights casting shadows on graffiti-covered walls. I climbed the stairs to the third floor, the stench of mold and garbage assaulting my nose. Lucas's door was ajar, loud rock music blaring out. I pushed it open without knocking, and the scene before me left me stunned. The small makeshift apartment was in horrifying disarray, the floor littered with empty beer cans, cigarette butts, crumpled bedding slips scattered everywhere. The air was thick with the stench of alcohol mixed with stale cigarette smoke. On the table, half-empty liquor bottles sat beside a messy pile of papers, unpaid bills, football betting slips. Just one glance and I knew. Lucas was still deep in his old ways. No stable job, addicted to gambling and stimulants. The downfall had never stopped. It had only been hidden for a short time. My heart twisted. I had once believed he changed, fooled myself into thinking his old promises were real. And now, he sold our parents' house to pay gambling debts? Lucas was sitting on the worn-out sofa, smoking, and when he saw me, his face went pale. "Dom, why are you here at this hour?" he stammered, hurriedly standing up, fumbling to clean the mess. Beer cans rolled across the floor, betting slips flew everywhere. I didn't wait. I charged in, growling, "What did you do to Mom and Dad's house? You sold it? How dare you bring strangers to kick them out?" I grabbed his collar, slamming him against the wall. My eyes burned red with rage. Lucas avoided my gaze, his face drained of color. "Calm down, bro. It wasn't like that. I just borrowed temporarily, then they pressured me too hard. I had to sell. Had to sell the house that's in my name?" I roared. "What right do you have?" Lucas swallowed hard, his voice shaking. "I didn't think it would go this far. It was just temporary paperwork. I planned to pay it off and buy it back. I swear." "What do you swear?" I cut him off. 3 years ago, you swore the same thing. And what happened?" He turned his face away, his voice fading. "I didn't expect them to kick Mom and Dad out. I didn't want that to happen." I let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "Didn't want it? Do you even know where they are right now?" Lucas fell silent. "They're living in the van," I said slowly, each word like a nail being hammered in. "Eating dry bread in that moldy old van." Lucas froze for a moment, then frantically shook his head. "It's not my fault. The debts were too pressing. The loan sharks threatened me. The mafia, you know. I had no other choice. It's always someone else's fault." My voice dropped low. "Never yours." He looked up, eyes red but still trying to argue. "You don't understand. You have a stable job, money. But me," I cut him off. "Don't blame me. I've carried you enough." The room fell into heavy silence. I looked at Lucas, and for the first time I no longer saw my little brother, just a stranger desperately avoiding responsibility. In that moment I understood. The most terrifying thing wasn't that Lucas had fallen, he could have risen again, but that he had never truly accepted blame or felt remorse. The trust I had clung to for so long collapsed completely, like a house of cards tumbling down. I released my grip, stepped back, feeling drained to the point of emptiness. I said, my voice ice cold. "This time, handle it yourself. I'm not saving you anymore." Lucas called after me, but I had already turned and walked out, carrying a decision I knew would change everything from that moment on. I left Lucas's apartment in a state of extreme rage, barely able to control my breathing. The anger was like a ticking time bomb in my chest, making my heart pound wildly, blood rushing to my head in burning waves. That cluttered room, with its overpowering stench of alcohol and scattered bedding slips, still haunted me as I rushed down the stairs, my feet moving hurriedly as if fleeing. The door of the rundown building swung open and the Chicago night wind slapped my face with icy coldness, but I felt nothing except the fury burning inside. I jumped into the car, inserted the key with trembling hands, and started the engine. It roared to life. I floored the accelerator and sped into the darkness, the dim streetlights flashing by like fleeting streaks of light. I drove aimlessly through the night, my mind blank. The late-night Chicago streets were deserted, only the sound of tires rolling on the wet road after the rain and the faint murmur of an old rock song on the radio that I didn't bother to turn off. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white and ached, but I didn't let go. The rage gradually gave way to old memories flooding back, like a slow-motion film reel pulling me into the past. 3 years ago, everything started sliding off track. A small crack at first, but it slowly widened into an abyss. I remembered it all clearly, and now, in the darkness of this night, those images came alive, painfully sharp. 3 years ago, I was still a busy flight attendant, flying from one route to the next, New York to Paris, then looping back to Los Angeles. My life back then consisted of suitcases, unfamiliar hotels, and short video calls with family. Lucas was 28 at the time, the little brother I always saw as a child who needed protection. He had once been a smart kid, good at school, but then everything changed. Lucas fell deeply into gambling, casinos, and stimulants. At first, I didn't know. How could I when I was halfway around the world? But the first signs were sporadic calls asking to borrow money. "Bro, can you lend me some for gas?" he'd say casually. Then the amounts grew larger. "I need to pay back a friend just temporarily." I sent the money thinking it was minor, but deep down I felt uneasy. Because of my constant work travel and endless flights, I only realized something was wrong when my parents started showing worry and evading questions whenever I asked about Lucas. In our weekend video calls, Mom would force a smile, her eyes red. "Lucas is fine, son, he's just busy with work." Dad would deftly change the subject. "What's your next flight? Tell me about it." I pressed them, but they just shook their heads, saying it was nothing. A nameless unease grew inside me, but the whirlwind of work quickly swept me away. I convinced myself it was just unnecessary worry. Until one day, everything exploded. It was a stifling summer afternoon. I had just landed from London, exhausted but excited to visit home. The car stopped in front of our old house in Aurora, a 2-story wooden home with a small garden where Lucas and I grew up. But as I stepped inside, a heavy atmosphere enveloped everything. My parents were sitting in the living room, faces pale, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "You're home," Mom said, her voice trembling before bursting into tears. Dad sighed and handed me the paper. A mortgage foreclosure notice from the bank. My heart constricted. The house, the family's only asset, filled with memories, was now at risk of being seized. It turned out Lucas had tricked my parents into signing a mortgage. He approached them with a pitiful expression. "Mom, Dad, I need to borrow temporarily to get through this tough time. It's just a short-term loan. I'll pay it back right away." He told them about mounting gambling debts, bad friends pressuring him, and worse, threats from the mafia if he didn't pay. Out of love for their youngest son and fear he'd get involved with the mafia. My parents agreed to sign without fully understanding the consequences. They thought they were saving him, but in reality they were pushing the whole family into the abyss. When it all came to light, the bank sent the foreclosure notice because Lucas hadn't paid. My parents finally realized. I remembered their desperate eyes clearly. Mom sitting and crying, blaming herself. How could I be so stupid trusting him like that? While Dad bowed his head, shoulders slumped, whispering, "I failed." I immediately went looking for Lucas. He was at a cheap suburban bar, drunk among empty beer cans and sleazy friends. When I dragged him outside, he even tried to smile. "Dom, you're back? It's no big deal." But when I confronted him, he collapsed to his knees on the sidewalk, tears streaming down. "Bro, I was wrong. This is my last mistake. I swear I'll quit gambling, quit drinking, start over." His voice shook with promises. My parents, when they found out, couldn't bring themselves to scold him harshly. They just hugged him, Mom stroking his hair. "Change, son, and our family will be okay." Dad nodded. "We believe in you this time." I stood torn between anger and compassion, disappointed and tormented. Angry at Lucas for betraying trust, for pushing the family to the brink. But I pitied him because, after all, he was my blood brother, the kid I taught to play soccer, the one I protected from bullies at school. In the end, I decided to shoulder the consequences for the whole family. I couldn't let my parents become homeless in their old age. I withdrew all my savings accumulated over years, flight attendant salaries, long-haul bonuses that I had set aside for my future. It wasn't enough, so I borrowed more from the bank at sky-high interest and begged old friends and colleagues for interest-free loans. In total, an enormous sum. But I gritted my teeth and bore it. I used that money to buy a new house for my parents in Naperville, smaller but cozy, with a lush front yard and a garage big enough for the old van. To prevent it from happening again, I put the house in my name, seeing it as the ultimate protection for them. "From now on, live here. The house is in my name, so everything will be safer," I told them firmly. They nodded, eyes red with gratitude. Lucas made all sorts of promises. "Bro, I'll get a job and pay you back." I nodded, hopeful, though my heart was full of doubt. A period of calm followed. Lucas seemed to change. He found part-time work at a coffee shop, wandered less, and occasionally visited my parents with small gifts. No major trouble, no more borrowing money. I convinced myself my brother had truly changed, that those vows weren't lies. On every flight home, I saw the family gathered, laughing and talking, and thought, thank goodness everything's okay. I was even proud of my decision, believing brotherly love had prevailed. But then the image of my parents huddled in the van yanked me back to reality. I was driving through the night, gripping the wheel tightly, and realized Lucas had never really changed. He had only learned to hide it better. The fake smiles, empty promises, and now this second betrayal. Selling the house to pay gambling debts. The anger surged again, mixed with heartbreaking pain. How could I have been so foolish? How could I let him deceive me over and over? The car sped along the highway, headlights piercing the dark road, but inside me the darkness was even thicker. I knew that from this night on I had to act, not for Lucas, but for my parents, for myself. I returned to the apartment as dawn was breaking, the first light of morning faintly piercing through the Chicago skyscrapers, painting a corner of the sky red. The room was still warm from the heater I had turned on before leaving, but the atmosphere was heavy, like a sheet of lead pressing on my chest. My parents were asleep on the sofa, blankets wrapped tightly around them, their gaunt faces visible in the dim glow of the nightlight. I didn't wake them. I quietly took off my jacket, sat down in the chair opposite, and stared into space. My mind was swirling with images, Lucas's pale face, the scattered bedding slips, and my parents huddled in the van. I tried to lie down on the bed, hoping sleep would come, but that night I tossed and turned endlessly. My bed, a simple one in the cramped bedroom, was usually where I rested after long flights, but tonight it felt like a torture rack. I rolled from side to side, the sheets and blankets rumpled, sweat pouring out despite the cold. My eyes stayed wide open, staring at the cracked ceiling, cracks that mirrored my family right now. I barely slept, only dozing off in short, nightmarish bursts. In my fragmented dreams, I saw Lucas on his knees apologizing like 3 years ago, only for him to smirk and turn into a shadow that swallowed my parents whole. I jolted awake, heart pounding, cold sweat soaking through. This can't go on, I muttered to myself, sitting up to wipe my face. The decision had crystallized. I had to report Lucas. No more covering up, no more forgiving. This was the final line. A few hours later, when the light outside the window grew brighter, I managed to drift off briefly. The sleep was shallow and interrupted, just enough to keep my body from collapsing. When I woke again, the sun was fully up, morning sunlight streaming through the window and casting a pale glow over the room. My body ached from lack of sleep, but the remnants of last night's anger kept my mind taut. I quietly went to the kitchen and prepared a simple breakfast for everyone: fried eggs, toasted bread, and black coffee. The smell of food spread through the apartment, a feeble attempt to dispel the heavy atmosphere. Soon after, my parents woke up. Mom rubbed her eyes and walked out, exhaustion still etched on her face. Dad sat up slowly, his shoulders slumped as if still carrying an unyielding burden. We sat around the small dining table. Silence stretched on. No one spoke first. Only the light clinking of spoons against bowls, the dry crunch of toast, and disjointed eating sounds. Mom occasionally glanced at me with worry. Dad kept his head down, eyes fixed on the plate of eggs in front of him. I couldn't stand it any longer and broke the silence by bringing up last night's confrontation with Lucas. "I met Lucas last night," I said, my voice calm but resolute, setting down my spoon. "He admitted everything. Sold the house to pay gambling debts. Forged documents." My words were like a delayed bomb, making the air even tenser. Mom stopped eating, her eyes turning red. Dad sighed without lifting his head. I continued, explaining that everything had exceeded my tolerance. I've shielded him too many times. 3 years ago, I took on the debt and bought a new house. And now, you two living in the van, I can't keep doing this. My voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from pain. I stated firmly that I could no longer cover for him or stay silent. I'm going to report Lucas to the authorities. The law has to get involved. There's no other way. My words hit like a shock. Dad froze, bowing his head with a deep sigh. He no longer had the strength to advise leniency or ask me to go easy as he had before. Deep wrinkles lined his face. His eyes were clouded with fatigue. "You've decided to do that?" he whispered hoarsely. He understood the matter had crossed the boundary of ordinary brotherly ties. He had been the father trying to hold the family together, but now he knew it was impossible. "I don't blame you, son. I just feel pain, because in the end I still couldn't keep the family intact the way I tried." Mom burst into tears, overwhelmed by shame and despair. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She clutched the napkin tightly. How did our family end up like this? What did I do wrong? How did Lucas turn out this way? She kept blaming herself, lamenting why the family had fallen into this state. Her voice broke, interspersed with sobs. Though heartbroken, she didn't oppose my decision. She just nodded silently through her tears. I hugged Mom, feeling her body tremble. Breakfast ended in heavy silence, but the decision had been made. Actions followed words. That very day, I filed a report with the authorities. I drove to the local police station in Chicago, my heart pounding with nerves. The police office was busy, phones ringing, the smell of coffee and old paperwork. I sat across from a middle-aged officer named Ramirez who listened to my story with a serious expression. I provided all relevant information about the house ownership, documents in my name, old purchase receipts, and Lucas's illegal sale. My brother forged signatures and sold the house without my consent, I explained, voice steady but hands clenched. Officer Ramirez took notes and nodded. We'll investigate. We'll need more evidence, but it sounds serious. The authorities moved quickly and opened an investigation file. The following days were tense, suffocating with anticipation. I received calls from the police requesting additional documents. Lucas was summoned for questioning. I imagined him sitting in the interrogation room, face pale, forced to present the sale papers. Those documents with the forged signatures were sent to forensics for verification. I waited for the results like sitting on hot coals, checking my phone constantly. Then the results came. The power of attorney and related signatures were forged. The officer called me. "We have evidence. This case will go to court." My heart raced, a mix of relief and pain. The trial took place a few weeks later at the district court in Chicago. The courtroom was cold, with rows of old wooden benches and the smell of paper and sweat. I sat on the plaintiff's side next to the lawyer I hired, a serious middle-aged man with thick glasses. Lucas sat on the defendant's side, wearing a wrinkled shirt, head bowed. My parents sat in the gallery. Mom clutched Dad's hand tightly, eyes red. The trial was lengthy, with full evidence of my legal ownership. Purchase documents from 3 years ago, bank receipts, and the forged signature verification report. The prosecutor presented clearly. Defendant Lucas Young forged documents to sell property he had no right to, causing harm to his family. Lucas's defense attorney tried to argue the defendant was under pressure from debts and did not intend to defraud, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge ruled the transaction invalid. The house was ordered returned to me, meaning my parents could return to their old home. When the judge banged the gavel and declared transaction void, property returned to original owner, I felt a burden lift, but no joy. Lucas was found guilty of charges including document forgery, fraudulent appropriation of property, and dishonest transaction. The sentence, 2 years probation with supervision, heavy fines, and 200 hours of community service. No prison time, but enough to make him reflect. In the courtroom, Lucas kept his head down, face ashen, for the first time showing clear fear and confusion. No more evasions or blame shifting. He seemed to finally grasp the real consequences of what he had done. He glanced at me, eyes red, lips moving silently. Dad sat quietly, his gaze heavy, relieved that the house was returned and he could go back to his familiar garage and tinker with the old van, yet pained to see his youngest son in the dock. He held Mom's hand. His shoulders trembled slightly. Linda cried silently, the loss not from property but from watching the family shatter before her eyes. She covered her mouth, tears streaming. I listened to the verdict with outward calm, but inside I felt weighed down. I had regained the house for my parents. I could take them back to Naperville and start over. Yet I also knew that from that moment our family would never be whole again. The brotherly bond was broken. Trust could not be mended. As we left the courtroom, cold winds slapped my face. I watched Lucas being led away and silently wondered if the price was too high. Then I realized, no matter how painful, I had no regrets. Justice had been served, and that was the only right thing I could still do. After the trial, my parents returned to the house in Naperville with heavy hearts. I drove them home. The familiar route was now suffocatingly silent. When the car stopped at the gate, Mom stepped out first, her hands trembling as she held the key. The house was exactly the same, lush front yard, white picket fence, but the atmosphere inside was completely different, like a cold, desolate tomb. I helped them rearrange their belongings, the old clothes from the van, the few scattered items that remained. Dad quietly placed books back on the shelf. Mom wiped dust from the dining table, but no one spoke. I could clearly feel the lingering emptiness after the ordeal, like a vast void that had swallowed the old laughter. Every corner of the house reminded us of Lucas. The sofa where he used to sprawl watching TV, the garage where Dad taught him to fix cars. Now those memories were nothing but pain. I stood watching them for a while, my heart constricting, then said goodbye to return to Chicago. My flight attendant job called me back. The long days of flights resumed one after another, from Chicago to New York, then looping through London. Life gradually got swept back into its familiar rhythm, checking luggage, serving passengers, smiling politely even though my heart was heavy. Up in the plane, amid the white clouds, I tried to forget, but the courtroom images still haunted me. Lucas with his head bowed, Mom crying silently. On nights in unfamiliar hotels, I lay awake wondering if I had been too harsh. But then I reminded myself, This is the only way to make him stop. Each time I visited my parents, usually on weekends or between flights, we still gathered around the dinner table. Mom cooked familiar dishes: roasted meat, vegetable salad, hot fresh bread. But the meals had become much quieter, more like solemn ceremonies than family gatherings. No one mentioned Lucas. His name had become taboo in the household. If someone accidentally let it slip, the atmosphere would instantly freeze. Dad talked about the weather. Mom asked about my flights, and I answered briefly, avoiding the empty space at the table. Lucas's old seat. I saw Dad aging visibly, hair completely white, steps slow and labored. Mom often sat staring out the window, eyes distant as if waiting for something that would never come. I tried to fill the silence with cheerful stories, but deep down, I knew the crack was too deep. A few months passed like that. Time flowed quietly like a river, carrying away the pain but never erasing it. One spring evening, I visited my parents after a flight from Paris. The air was cool. The wind carried the scent of early blooming flowers. We were having dinner, Mom's grilled salmon with steamed vegetables, when there was a sudden, frantic knocking at the door. The sound echoed through the quiet house, startling me. My heart raced. Who could that be at this hour? Mom whispered, her face paling. Dad looked at me, then stood up slowly. I pushed back my chair and went to the door first, a bad premonition rising. When I opened it, Lucas stood there looking gaunt and disheveled. Wrinkled clothes, hollow cheeks, unkempt beard, eyes wild with panic. He had wasted away, cheeks sunken, looking like a wandering ghost. He stammered my name in a hoarse voice, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of being followed. My parents froze at the sight of their youngest son in that state, both pitying and terrified. Mom covered her mouth, eyes red. What have you done to end up so scared? Dad stood still, gripping the doorframe tightly. Lucas begged to come inside, voice pleading. Please let me in. I need to talk. I hesitated for a second, then opened the door wider and pulled him in. The door closed, the lock clicked, but the tension in the air felt ready to explode. Lucas entered the living room, legs shaking, then suddenly dropped to his knees before my parents and me. Mom, Dad, Dom. Please listen to me, he cried, tears streaming down his dirty cheeks. He begged us to give him a chance to speak, to be heard, his voice breaking with sobs. We sat down. Mom tremblingly poured him water, Dad staring fixedly. Lucas confessed that during his downfall he had borrowed a large sum from the mafia to keep gambling. I thought just a few more games and I'd win it back, but the debts piled up, he said, voice shaking. When he could no longer pay, the lenders started hunting him, threatening his life and even his family's. They said they'd come after you and Dom if I didn't pay. Lucas recounted how for months he had lived in hiding, constantly moving, sleeping on park benches, begging for meals. He hadn't dared return home for fear of implicating us. But he had been lingering near the neighborhood for days, waiting for a chance to see me. Because you're the only one who can save me. In utter shame, Lucas begged me for help one last time, saying that without money to pay the debt, he would be killed. Bro, they'll kill me. And maybe the whole family. Please help me just this once. His voice was desperate. His hands clutched my shirt tightly. I listened in silence, my face hardening as memories of his 2 previous betrayals replayed clearly in slow motion. The first time mortgaging the old house, the second forging documents to sell this one. Old anger surged, mixed with suspicion. Are you telling the truth? Or is this another lie to deceive me and Mom and Dad again? I refused outright, voice ice cold. I don't know what's real and what's a lie anymore. The 2 times you fooled me before have left me with no trust for you at all. Lucas panicked, continuing to kneel and beg, turning to my parents for help. I beg you, Mom and Dad, please talk to him. I can't survive like this. He sobbed, body trembling. Robert and Linda watched the scene with excruciating pain. Pitying their fallen youngest son, once their pride, yet terrified that disaster would drag the family into the abyss again. Dad bowed his head silently, feeling helpless because he could no longer protect his children as before. He had once been the pillar, but now could only sigh. "What have you done to end up like this, Lucas? I don't know how to protect you anymore." Mom burst into tears, torn between fear of losing her son and the trauma of what Lucas had caused. She covered her face, tears pouring. "How did you let yourself get to this point? I love you so much, but we've already lost almost everything." She turned to me, trembling, asking if there was any other way to save Lucas without further destroying the family. "Son, is there any way? I don't want to lose my youngest, but I'm so scared." I looked at my parents, seeing clearly the pain and exhaustion etched deeply on their faces, deeper wrinkles, eyes dimmed from tears. I looked at Lucas, his emaciated and desperate figure stripped of any former pride, now just a pitiful man. Inside me surged a fierce internal conflict between reason and family ties. Reason warned, "Don't help. The tragedy will repeat a third time. He'll sell the house again, borrow more, betray again." But family ties whispered, "He's your blood brother, and if the mafia really comes, what will happen to Mom and Dad?" I feared that helping would trap us in the same vicious cycle again, but at the same time I didn't want my parents dragged into danger from outsiders. Threatening calls, shadowy figures lurking. In that moment, I understood that my upcoming decision would not only determine Lucas's fate, but also whether this family still had a chance to stand. The living room air was heavy. Mom's crying echoed, Dad's sighs, and Lucas's pleading eyes. My heart pounded wildly, tense as if standing on the edge of an abyss. I looked around the room, the family photos hanging on the walls, the dinner table still half finished with our meal, and the darkness slowly creeping in through the window, all of it silently awaiting my decision. Reason told me to turn my back, to let Lucas bear the full consequences of what he had caused. But the image of my elderly parents, trembling with fear, made it impossible for me to do that. After a heavy silence, I spoke, my voice hoarse from the tension. "Fine. I'll help you this one last time." I looked straight at Lucas. "Not because I still trust you, but because I can't let Mom and Dad keep living in the fear you've created." Lucas broke down crying right there, a mix of relief and despair, tears pouring like rain as his body shook while kneeling on the floor. He kept bowing his head, thanking me profusely as if afraid the decision would vanish if he said the wrong thing. His face was contorted, red eyes looking up at me with gratitude mixed with fear, like a lost child finally finding the way home. My parents breathed a sigh of relief as if they had just been pulled from a bottomless abyss. Dad slumped into his chair, shoulders sagging but his eyes less strained, while Mom wiped her tears, her trembling hand grasping mine. Still, unease lingered in their hearts. I could see it in the way Mom looked at Lucas, both loving and afraid, as if she knew this was only temporary. "But listen clearly," I said firmly, standing up from my chair to create some distance. "This help comes with conditions. If you don't do exactly what I say, I'll stop paying the debt immediately. No second chances. No negotiations." Lucas flinched and looked up. "I know. I won't let you down again." I cut him off, not letting him soothe me with familiar words. "Don't say that to me. I've heard it enough. This time, actions only. No promises." He nodded quickly, voice urgent. "Yes, bro. Whatever you say, I'll do." I laid out the first condition, my tone steady but cold. "You have to get a job. I'll arrange a real one for you, stable with a monthly salary. I won't accept those casual gigs you quit after a few days." I stared directly at him. "If you quit midway, I'll know right away. And then, everything ends." Lucas swallowed hard and nodded again. I continued without pause. "Second, you have to join a gambling addiction program, the center I choose. Weekly reports. No skipping sessions." I emphasized each word. "Just one evasion and I'll take it as you choosing to go back to your old ways." Lucas quickly said, "No way, bro." "I promise I'll attend everyone." I stated the final condition, slowly but decisively. I'll only pay the debt in installments. Only when I see proof with my own eyes that you're complying. Pay stubs and confirmations from the rehab center, everything." I stared at him unblinkingly. "I'm not handing over a lump sum. You earn as much progress as I pay for. One mistake, and it's over." Lucas froze. Fear was plain on his face as he realized this wasn't an easy rescue anymore. "You won't change your mind, right?" he asked softly, almost pleading. I replied, voice ice cold, "This is the only time I'm discussing this. After that, there'll be nothing more." The room fell silent. Finally, Lucas bowed his head low. "I'll do it. Not because you're paying," he said quietly, "but because if I fail this time, I know I'll lose everything." Mom hugged my arm tightly, her eyes full of gratitude mixed with fear, tears streaming again. She squeezed harder, clinging to this last hope. Dad just nodded silently, understanding that this decision was the final boundary between saving someone and destroying the family. He looked at me, eyes dimmed with age, then turned to Lucas. "Don't disappoint us again." The living room atmosphere gradually settled, but tension still hung in the air like a ticking time bomb. The next day, everything moved quickly. I woke early, brewing strong black coffee to stay alert after a sleepless night. Lucas had arranged to meet the lenders, the mafia he mentioned, at a quiet suburban cafe on the outskirts of Naperville. I drove him there. The ride was silent except for the faint news on the radio. Lucas sat beside me, twisting his hands, face pale with anxiety. "Do you think they'll agree?" he asked softly, voice trembling. I didn't answer, just gripped the steering wheel tighter, focusing on the road. The meeting took place in an atmosphere tense enough to suffocate. The old cafe had scarred wooden tables and a thick stench of cigarette smoke. The lenders, 3 burly men with scarred faces wearing black leather jackets, sat in a secluded corner, eyes scanning like hunting wolves. When we entered, one smirked. "The kid and his big brother finally showed up. Scared now, huh?" I stayed calm and in control, sitting across from them without showing any fear, even though my heart pounded. Lucas presented the loan documents, the interest amounts and deadlines, his hands shaking as he placed them on the table. The crumpled papers showed an enormous debt, tens of thousands of dollars, with his scrawled signature. I examined every detail carefully, skimming the exorbitant interest rates and threatening clauses, realizing this wasn't a fabricated story to beg for money. It was real, actual mafia, with threats that could turn into action at any moment. Anger at Lucas surged again, but I suppressed it and focused on the task. I negotiated directly, voice even. "I'll pay my brother's debt, but in installments, not all at once. Here's the schedule." I slid over the paper I had prepared, detailing the amounts, timelines, and payment conditions, monthly gradual payments based on Lucas's progress. We drafted a written agreement. I insisted they sign it on the spot, trusting nothing to verbal promises. The lenders were displeased. One growled, "Who do you think you are, setting terms?" But in the end, they accepted, because refusing meant they might recover nothing. Killing Lucas would leave them empty-handed, and they signed, smirking. "Fine, but if you're late even one day, we'll visit your parents' house first." I finalized the agreement, promising nothing beyond what was on paper, then stood and left. On the way out, Lucas walked behind me with his head down, voice trembling as he repeatedly apologized and thanked me. "Thank you, bro. I won't let you down." He kept repeating it like a prayer. I didn't respond verbally, just nodded once briefly, eyes fixed on the road. I knew apologies meant nothing now without actions to back them. In my heart, trust was no longer something I could give. It had to be proven over time. The car sped back toward Naperville. Spring wind blew through the window, but I felt nothing except the new burden on my shoulders. This is the last time, I told myself, and if Lucas fails, I'll let go forever. In the first days after the agreement, everything unfolded under pent-up tension. I allowed Lucas to temporarily stay at my parents' house, but with clear conditions. He had to be under the supervision of both me and them, with no room for secrets or evasion. You'll sleep in your old room, but the door stays unlocked and Mom and Dad will check on you anytime, I told him as I drove him home, my tone leaving no room for argument. Lucas nodded vigorously, not daring to object. His gaunt appearance lingered, but a faint glimmer of hope flickered in his eyes. My parents agreed, though Mom looked at me worriedly. Are you sure, son? We've already suffered enough. I hugged her and whispered, I'm sure, Mom. But this time, I'm in complete control. I didn't wait. I immediately arranged for Lucas to work as a warehouse employee at a logistics center in the industrial area on the outskirts of Chicago, a place I knew through a colleague. It was grueling work, lifting and carrying goods, stocking shelves, fixed hours from early morning to late evening, salary paid directly into a bank account rather than cash, and no party environment around, just factories and trucks. This job isn't easy, but it'll force you to live on a proper schedule, I said as I drove him to the interview. Lucas stared out the window and murmured, I'll try my hardest. The manager, a stern middle-aged man, looked him up and down, then nodded. 1 week trial. Remember, don't be late. I waited outside, heart pounding, wondering if he'd hold up. But Lucas got the job and I breathed a sigh of relief. The first step was cleared. Lucas started working regularly, leaving home at dawn when it was still dim and returning late at night, body exhausted and clothes covered in dust and sweat. I saw the change in him from the very first days. No more wandering because he was drained after each shift. Mom often packed lunch for him. Her eyes lit up seeing her youngest son wake early, dressed neatly in his uniform. Dad nodded quietly in approval and sometimes helped him clean the motorcycle, the vehicle he used to commute since I wouldn't lend him the car. At the same time, Lucas attended a weekly gambling addiction support group at a center downtown. I drove him to the first session, waiting outside and catching faint snippets of discussion inside. Each week I received attendance confirmation reports from the center, detailed emails about his participation and what he shared. He is making progress and adapting better to this environment, the first report read, and I reread it, heart racing with a mix of hope and doubt. To be certain, I made surprise calls to Lucas at random times without warning. Sometimes at midday while he was working. How's today going? What's your progress? He'd answer hurriedly, voice tired but genuine. I'm hauling goods, bro. Everything's fine. Sometimes late at night when he got home. Where are you? Tell me about today's schedule. My parents reported what they observed daily. Punctual comings and goings, a humbler attitude, Lucas gradually getting used to discipline, keeping his room tidy, helping Mom with dishes without complaining. He's changing for the better, son, Mom whispered over the phone one evening, voice trembling with emotion. I smiled faintly, but inside I remained anxious. Was this real? Or just a facade? Gradually, Lucas settled into a more stable routine with no more impulsive outbursts or unexplained disappearances. No late-night calls from bars, no lingering smell of alcohol. He started sending me photos of his first monthly paycheck, a modest amount, but earned himself. I'll save up to buy a gift for Mom and Dad first, he texted, and I replied briefly, Good, keep it up. Whenever I visited my parents, usually weekends between flights, we gathered for meals again. The dinners were no longer as heavy as before, occasional soft laughter emerged, like when Dad told old stories from our childhood and Lucas chuckled quietly without interrupting. Mom made her signature roasted meat, and for the first time in months she truly smiled, her wrinkles softening. Our family is getting better, she said, stroking Lucas's hair. I noticed my parents smiling more, their eyes less strained, as if a burden had been partially lifted. Dad often sat in the garage tinkering with cars alongside Lucas, teaching him oil changes during peaceful afternoons. Mom shared how neighbors praised him. They see Lucas going to work regularly and say the boy has changed. Lucas spoke less and listened more, no longer arguing or resisting as before. When I asked about the addiction program, he shared details. Today, the group talked about temptations. I shared my old story. Now it's hard, but I'll try harder. I saw the first signs of maturity in Lucas, though still clumsy and slow. How he apologized for being a little late, how he washed his own clothes, how he asked about my work instead of focusing only on himself. After some time, about 3 months with stable income, Lucas suggested moving out to rent a room near his workplace. "It'll be more convenient for work, bro, and I don't want to keep disrupting Mom and Dad's routine," he said one evening at the dinner table. His voice was sincere, eyes meeting mine without evasion. I weighed it carefully, lying awake all night, balancing risks against opportunity. "If you move out, the supervision stays the same. Weekly reports and surprise checks," I said, and he nodded immediately. My parents hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, and I helped him find a cheap rental near the logistics center. On moving day, Lucas hugged them, voice choking. "I promise I'll visit often." Since Lucas moved out, small changes began to appear, making me watch anxiously. There were times I called and he answered slower than usual. The phone rang longer, then his voice slightly out of breath. "I was in the shower, bro." I said nothing but made a mental note. Once or twice, the addiction center reported he had requested a session off. When I asked, he said it was due to a shift change. "Night shift made me exhausted, so I skipped one session," he explained, voice casual, but I felt uneasy. My parents said he visited less often, always citing work. "He calls and says he'll come on the weekend, but then something sudden comes up," they told me with worry. Mom whispered, "What do you think? Is he okay?" I reassured them, but inside, that familiar unease was creeping back like a lurking shadow. I had no concrete evidence to suspect anything. Paychecks still came regularly. Most rehab reports were positive, and when I dropped by his rental unannounced, everything was clean. No smell of alcohol or betting slips. But prolonged silence could sometimes be more frightening than loud mistakes. Calls grew fewer, messages shorter, and I began to wonder, is Lucas hiding something, or just tired? On every flight, I sat looking down at the clouds and worry surged. Everything began to veer off the original track slowly but unmistakably, like a small crack on a windshield gradually spreading into a web. At first, it was just minor details. A call I made during lunch break that rang for a long time before going to voicemail, followed hours later by a text. "I was in a meeting, bro." I checked the addiction program schedule via emails from the center and noticed Lucas was no longer attending regularly. Sessions missed without prior notice, with vague notes like personal matters. My heart raced as I read the reports, but when I called to ask, he just forced a laugh over the phone. I was too tired, so I switched to another session. "It's fine, bro." His voice sounded normal, but there was something strained about it that left me uneasy. I decided to contact his workplace, the logistics center, to verify. When I called the manager, he sighed over the phone. "Lucas? He's not coming in regularly anymore. He frequently asks for time off, even skips shifts without notice. We've warned him, but he doesn't listen." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me frozen in my Chicago apartment, gripping the phone so tightly my hand ached. On the weekends, I visited my parents in Naperville. Lucas appeared far less often, no longer dropping by with small gifts or cheerful stories as before. "He says he's busy with work," Mom told me, her voice worried, eyes gazing out the window as if waiting. Dad shook his head. "Maybe the boy's really tired." But I could clearly see the unease in their eyes, and inside me suspicion grew. One time, Lucas showed up briefly on a weekend afternoon while I was at my parents' house fixing the garage. He stopped by, clothes wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes, and only stayed a few minutes. "I came to visit Mom and Dad," he said, voice weary, avoiding my gaze. I pressed him right away. "Why have you been so bad at reporting? How's the addiction program going? Is work okay?" Lucas answered vaguely, citing fatigue or shift changes. "I'm exhausted, bro, lots of night shifts. I'll tell you more tomorrow." When I dug deeper, "Where's this week's rehab report? I need to see it." He grew irritated, avoiding my eyes, face flushing. "Stop controlling me like this. I'm an adult." His tone was sharp, Then he stood up abruptly, said a hurried goodbye to my parents, and left in a huff, slamming the door. I stood there, heart pounding, the familiar feeling of evasion flooding back, just like the previous times when he lied about debts and gambling. I began recognizing those familiar signs like an old song echoing. Dodging questions, vague excuses, irritability when pressed. A heavy feeling settled in me, even though I still had no concrete proof, no betting slips, no smell of alcohol over the phone. But the worry accumulated, keeping me awake at night in hotel rooms after flights, my mind spinning. Is he relapsing? I wondered, imagining the worst. Lucas back at the casino, new debts piling up, and all my efforts, the mafia agreement, monthly supervision, crumbling to nothing. I intensified my checks, calling more unexpectedly, but each time he answered, his voice grew more distant. Then one evening, after a long flight from New York, I decided to visit Lucas's apartment unannounced. Light rain fell. Cold wind stung my face as I drove through the Chicago suburbs. Yellowish streetlights reflecting on the wet road. My heart pounded, tense as if anticipating an approaching storm. When I arrived, the old rental building was mostly dark, only a few windows lit. Lucas's door was ajar, unlocked, the first sign that unsettled me. I pushed it open. The hinges creaked loudly in the quiet hallway. The scene before me left me stunned, as if struck by lightning. Lucas was slumped on the old sofa in a drunken stupor, breathing heavily, snoring mixed with incoherent mumbles. His face was flushed red, hair disheveled, clothes wrinkled and reeking of alcohol, dust, and sweat. Scattered on the table and floor were betting papers, football tickets, casino slips, glaring red numbers, mixed with empty liquor bottles rolling around, fresh loan documents with scrawled signatures, everything chaotic like a battlefield. The room was thick with the stench of alcohol, stale cigarette smoke, and sour sweat. I stood frozen for a few seconds. Shock quickly turned to surging rage, burning like fire. All the previous efforts, the months of supervision, the mafia deal, the faint hope, shattered completely in that moment. My hands clenched into fists, aching with tension. I rushed over and shook his shoulder hard. "Lucas, wake up right now," I growled, voice low but strained, struggling to contain the anger boiling in my chest. Lucas opened his eyes groggily, gaze clouded from the alcohol. He blinked repeatedly, trying to focus on me. "Why are you here?" he slurred slowly, voice hoarse. "I was sleeping. Why are you making so much noise?" I grabbed his collar and yanked him upright. "Look around this room," I said, voice trembling with fury. "Look at those betting slips. Look at the bottles. Look at those brand new loan papers. Is this what you call trying? Is this how you repay Mom and Dad? And me?" Lucas breathed heavily. His eyes flickered for a moment before turning defiant. "You don't understand," he said louder, voice growing sharp. "You're always looking down from your high horse, judging me. Do you know how heavy it feels to be controlled every day, every call, every report? Because you've never managed to stand on your own. You're a man without backbone, weak and cowardly," I shot back, voice low but cutting. "If you could, I wouldn't have to be here." Lucas shoved my hand away, staggering to his feet, face flushed. "I'm tired of it," he shouted. "Tired of always having to prove to you what I'm doing, where I am, whether I'm being good." "I'm not your prisoner," I interrupted. "You're not my prisoner. You're someone who's been given chance after chance, and every time you trample it." Lucas sneered, a twisted, bitter smile. "At least I live my own way, not always bowing my head following your orders like a worthless nobody." "That's not living," I said slowly, each word heavy. "That's you destroying yourself and dragging Mom and Dad down with you. Do you realize what would happen to them if I hadn't intervened?" Lucas yelled, voice cracking from drunkenness and despair. "Enough. I don't need you anymore. Don't need your money. Don't need your control or pity. Just leave." The room fell dead silent after that. I looked at Lucas for a long time, as if staring at a stranger. Finally, I released my grip and stepped back. My voice turned ice cold. "Fine. Live your life the way you choose. I paused, meeting his eyes directly. But don't drag Mom and Dad down with you ever again. I turned and walked out. The door slammed shut behind me, closing a conversation I knew had no way back. On the drive home, rain poured heavily. The windshield blurred with water, but I didn't wipe it, just drove in blind rage. I knew I had reached the final limit. No more forgiveness, no more rescue. When I got to my parents' house in Naperville, it was late, but I still told them everything, voice breaking with emotion. My parents sat in stunned silence, unable to speak, faces pale under the living room light. Mom cried, tears streaming uncontrollably, trembling hand covering her mouth as if afraid the sobs would escape. Dad bowed his head low, shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. His eyes were red but dry, only releasing a long, deep, weary sigh, as if words had become meaningless now. I looked at them and realized that every time Lucas fell again, the ones bearing the heaviest consequences were always my parents. The sleepless nights of worry, tears of disappointment, health worn down by stress. A hard truth emerged in my heart. Not everyone can be saved, even when you've done everything possible. I hugged them, feeling their frail bodies, and silently vowed that from now on I would protect them, even if it meant cutting ties with Lucas forever. The days that followed passed in a heavy fog. I returned to work with flights chaining one after another in an endless cycle. From Chicago to Los Angeles, then looping back to New York. Each takeoff, I tried to keep my mind occupied with passenger lists, safety checks, serving meals, anything to forget the image of that chaotic rental room. But in the late nights in unfamiliar hotels, the memories kept flooding back. The overpowering stench of alcohol, the scattered betting slips, and Lucas's sharp, yelling voice echoing in my head. I called my parents every day, trying to keep my voice steady as if everything was still okay. "How have you been, Mom and Dad? Are you eating properly?" I asked, though I already guessed the answer. On the other end, Mom replied slowly, her voice weak and trembling. "We're fine, son, don't worry. It's just that sometimes I think about Lucas, wondering how he is now." Dad took the phone, his voice low and brief. "Focus on your work, son. We can take care of things here." I could hear the pauses in their words, understanding they were trying to hide their pain so I wouldn't worry. And I did the same, concealing my own emptiness, the ache from having hoped so much only to face yet another disappointment. Lucas vanished after that argument. No calls, no messages, no return home. I didn't go looking for him, unwilling to get involved anymore, but the worry lingered quietly each day. Would the lenders come after us? Would my parents get dragged in? Yet deep down, the remorse still burned, smoldering, persistent, like a wound that hadn't healed before being touched again every night. Then one stifling summer afternoon, I had just landed for a layover after a long flight from London. My body was exhausted, eyes stinging from lack of sleep, back aching terribly from hours of standing and serving. O'Hare Airport was crowded, announcements blaring, the smell of coffee mixed with exhaust fumes. I dragged my suitcase toward the waiting area, dreaming of a long sleep in my Chicago apartment. But then my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. The screen showed Linda, my mother. My heart beat a little faster, a bad premonition creeping in. "Why is Mom calling at this hour?" I wondered, then answered. Her voice trembled, breaking over the line. Your dad is gone. Come home right away." I froze on the spot, feeling as if all strength had been drained from my body in seconds. The phone nearly slipped from my hand, my ears rang, the world around me blurred. "What did you just say? What happened to Dad?" My voice broke, unable to believe it. My father, the strong man who taught me to drive, who held me when Mom was sick, was gone? Impossible. Just a week ago, I had taken him for a routine checkup at the local hospital. He joked around, told old stories, even with underlying conditions like high blood pressure and diabetes, but he was alert. No dangerous signs. "I'm fine, son, don't worry," he said, patting my shoulder. And now he was gone. Mom sobbed over the phone. "Sudden heart attack. The doctors couldn't save him. Come right away. I need you most right now." I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm amid the bustling airport, passengers passing like ghosts. "I'll be there right away." "Hold on, Mom." I urgently reported to the airline, voice shaking as I explained the family emergency. They pulled me from the schedule immediately and arranged the earliest flight back to Chicago. Luckily, just a few hours away. On that short flight, I sat motionless, staring out at the white clouds, my mind reeling with memories. Dad teaching me soccer in the backyard, fixing the old van, smiling at my graduation. Why so sudden? And Lucas, was he involved? From the airport to the hospital, I drove like a maniac, hands gripping the wheel tightly, headlights piercing the dark highway. My mind spun, images of Dad flashing like a film, him smiling, sighing over Lucas, hugging Mom. Just a week ago, I took him for a checkup. The doctor examined him, said he was stable, just needed to take meds regularly. No signs. How could this happen? I pressed the accelerator harder. Wind howled through the cracked window, heart pounding with anxiety and pain. "Why did you leave me, Dad?" I muttered, tears streaming down. When I arrived at the hospital, the neon lights were coldly white. The smell of disinfectant hit my nose. I rushed to the reception desk, breathless. "My father's name is Robert Young. Where is he now?" They led me to the family waiting room, a small space with plastic chairs and stark white walls. Mom was sitting quietly in the corner, face gaunt, eyes red and swollen, hands clutching a crumpled tissue. When she saw me, she burst into sobs, standing shakily to hug me tightly as if clinging to her last support. I ached but tried to stay calm, holding her close and reassuring. "I'm here now. Everything will be okay." I stroked her back, feeling her frail warmth. My own tears fell. After she calmed a bit, sitting down and wiping her eyes, I asked what happened, voice hoarse from choking back sobs. Mom recounted, voice breaking with sobs. "Lucas came to the house early this morning. Asked for money, said debts were pressing. We refused, said we couldn't afford it anymore and couldn't keep helping like before." She paused, wiping tears, then continued. "Lucas grew disappointed. Then father and son argued. Dad scolded him, saying he had ruined the whole family. Lucas got angry, hurling harsh words at them without control. At the peak of the argument, Dad suddenly clutched his chest, face paling, then collapsed. A heart attack too sudden. Mom frantically called emergency services, but it all happened too fast. By the time they got Dad to the hospital, it was too late. Hearing that, rage surged through me, my hands clenched into fists so tightly they ached, blood rushing hot to my head. Lucas? Again Lucas? That ruined brother, after everything, came back begging for money. And now indirectly caused Dad's death? I growled through gritted teeth, standing to go find him right then, heart pounding like war drums, anger clouding reason. But Mom stopped me, grasping my shirt tightly, voice trembling. "He ran away after it happened. You need to stay and handle your father's funeral. Don't let anger make things worse." She cried, eyes pleading, and I had to suppress the fury, sitting back to hold her, though the fire still burned in my chest. We sat there for hours waiting for procedures, the cold hospital air enveloping us. I called the airline for extended leave and started handling paperwork, mechanical tasks to distract from the pain. The funeral was held 3 days later in a heavy atmosphere at the local cemetery in Naperville. Light rain fell. Cold wind blew through the rows of headstones, the smell of wet earth mixed with funeral flowers. Neighbors and old friends came to pay respects to the kind man who had lived for his family. Mr. Smith from the nearby garage, Mrs. Ruth Anderson, the neighbor, a few of Dad's old colleagues. They hugged Mom, whispering condolences. "Robert was a good man. We're so sorry." I stood by the casket, hands clenched, looking at Dad lying peacefully, face free of pain. Mom cried throughout, leaning on me. I tried to hold steady, arranging everything, flowers, eulogy, funeral music. During the service, as the priest read prayers and everyone bowed their heads, Lucas appeared late, sneaking in from the back. Unsteady appearance, wrinkled clothes, red eyes avoiding contact, unkempt beard. When I saw Lucas at the funeral, all the suppressed rage from Dad's death exploded so intense I lost control. I charged straight at him, grabbing his collar and shoving him hard into the chairs behind. "How dare you show up here, Lucas?" I roared, voice breaking in the quiet funeral space. "After everything you've done, you still have the nerve to stand before Dad's casket?" Lucas panicked, struggling to get up. "Listen to me, bro. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't mean it, I swear." Those words poured fuel on the fire. I lunged again, knocking him down once more and punching him in the face, hitting and yelling in despair. "Didn't mean it? You argued with Dad until he clutched his chest and collapsed. You yelled at him, pushed him to the brink, and now you tell me you didn't mean it?" Lucas yelled back, shielding his face while trying to fight back. "I didn't know Dad was that sick. I was just too angry." I shouted, voice hoarse. "Shut up. You're too angry killed him. If it weren't for you, he'd still be alive. If you hadn't destroyed this family, Dad wouldn't have died in such resentment." The scuffle threw the funeral into chaos. Several men rushed to hold me back, while others quickly pulled Lucas away. "That's enough. Please stop. This is a funeral, not a place to fight." Mom burst into sobs, rushing to grab my arm. "Son, I beg you, your dad wouldn't want to see this." Only then did I stop. My hands dropped limp. My whole body shook uncontrollably. The rage ebbed, leaving a suffocating void of pain. I broke down crying, sobs bursting out in the chapel. "Dad tried his whole life to keep this family together." I choked, looking at Lucas with desperate eyes. "And you destroyed it all, then stand here saying I didn't mean it." Lucas said nothing more. He broke free from those holding him, turned and ran from the funeral, dashing into the heavy rain like someone fleeing his own guilt. The service continued in an even heavier atmosphere. People whispered, but I didn't care. I completed the final procedures for Dad, signing papers, arranging the grave, seeing off guests. When everyone had left the cemetery quiet with only the patter of rain, I stood silently before Dad's grave, looking at the headstone engraved Robert Young, tears streaming mixed with rain. From that moment, I realized our family had crossed an unhealable rift. Dad gone, Lucas vanished, leaving only Mom and me in a vast emptiness. I knelt down, hand touching the cold, wet earth, voice faltering. "Dad, I'm sorry for not keeping my brother in check, for letting things come to this day. I promised to stay with Mom, to take care of her in your place." Wind howled through the cemetery, carrying chilling cold and wordless pain. And in that moment, I understood life from now on would be different. Lonelier, heavier, but no longer allowing me to be weak. In the days following the funeral, I took extended leave to stay with my mother, temporarily setting aside the familiar soaring job that I had once seen as an escape from reality. The airline approved it immediately, perhaps because my voice over the phone sounded so drained, so desperate. I didn't want to leave Naperville, didn't want to leave Mom alone in the house that now felt vast and empty, filled with voids that Dad had once occupied. Every morning when I woke, I saw her sitting at the kitchen table holding a cup of cold coffee, eyes gazing out at the backyard where Dad used to tend the flowers. I took care of everything around the house, cleaning the garage full of Dad's tools, organizing the will papers, even cooking the simple meals she liked. Chicken soup, toasted bread with strawberry jam. In those quiet mornings, we sat across from each other, speaking little, only the clink of spoons against plates and the wind outside the window. On nights when she couldn't sleep, I sat by her bed, holding her hand, telling old stories about my flights, the cities I'd visited, just to help her forget the pain, even for a moment. I felt her hand squeeze mine tightly, as if afraid to let go and lose her last anchor. The loss made the house feel oppressively empty, like a living tomb haunted by memories everywhere. The sofa where Dad used to sit reading the newspaper, the garage with the dusty old van, the living room missing his laughter. Every corner evoked him, tightening my heart. But my presence gave Mom something to lean on. She started eating more, smiling faintly when I told funny stories from old flights, and even going out to water the flowers, though her hands trembled. "You're so much like your dad, Dom," she said softly one day, voice trembling. Not loud, not talkative, but always there when someone needs you. Her eyes were red, but a faint smile crossed her face. I hugged her, feeling her fragile warmth, and vowed to myself to be strong. For her, for what remained of our family. About a week later, when the pain was still raw, I received a handwritten letter from Lucas. The white envelope was crumpled, postmarked from a suburban post office. No sender's name, but the familiar handwriting made my heart pound. I opened the letter in the living room under the dim yellow light casting shadows on the quiet floor, then slowly read it aloud to Mom. Each line seemed written in desperate restraint, heavy and shaky, as if Lucas had paused many times to swallow tears before continuing. Dear Dom and Mom, I'm writing these words because I don't have the courage to face you. I regret everything, a regret that comes too late after Dad's death. I know clearly that the words I said that day, that uncontrolled anger, pushed Dad to his final moment. I paused for a beat, then continued, voice lowering. I admit everything I've done, gambling, lies, betrayal, and gradually destroying this family. I hope you and Mom can forgive me, though I know I don't deserve it. Some mistakes can't be fixed, they can only be carried for life. The letter ended with shorter lines, heavier than all the rest. I'm going far away. I choose to leave the family so I won't cause you and Mom more pain. I want you both to live in peace even without me. Please don't look for me, Lucas. When I finished reading, the room sank into silence. Only the flickering yellow light and quiet sorrow spreading, like a wound that had scabbed over but still ached deep inside. Mom sat motionless, tears streaming, hands clutching the letter until it crumpled. Has he really repented? She whispered, voice trembling. I didn't answer, just held her, my heart torn between anger and pity. The letter felt like a farewell, and after it there was no direct news of Lucas. I didn't search, but occasionally, through old acquaintances, a high school friend or a former bar owner, I heard scattered bits of information. They said Lucas had left the city, perhaps heading west, doing simple manual labor like construction work or seasonal fruit picking. Living quietly in cheap motels, staying away from gambling and old connections. No one knew exactly where, only that he hadn't returned to his old ways. No rumors of debts, no sightings at casinos. He's really changed, Dom, one said, but I just nodded, heart filled with doubt mixed with faint hope. 2 years passed like a slow river, carrying away some of the pain but leaving deep scars. I returned to daily life and work. Flights resumed from Chicago to Paris, then looping to Tokyo. Amid the white clouds, I learned to keep a healthy distance from the past, no longer checking for news of Lucas daily, no longer lying awake thinking of his betrayals. Work became an escape, serving passengers, smiling politely, enjoying peaceful moments in the sky. Mom gradually healed. The pain didn't vanish, but no longer drowned her every day. She joined a support group at church, tended flowers more, and even called me weekly to share neighbor stories. I'm doing better, son, she said, voice steadier. We still gathered for holidays, but never mentioned Lucas, his name like a distant ghost. On the anniversary of Dad's passing, a chilly autumn afternoon, I took Mom to visit the grave. The sky was overcast. Yellow leaves fluttered along the road to Naperville Cemetery. The cemetery was quiet, only the wind whispering through the headstones and our slow footsteps on the gravel path. Mom held a bouquet of roses, Dad's favorite, clutching my hand tightly, voice soft. 2 years have passed, son. I nodded, heart heavy, memories of the funeral flooding back, the rain, the fight with Lucas, the tearing pain. As we approached Dad's grave, we saw a man kneeling before it, shoulders shaking silently. He was thin, weathered, hair long and disheveled, clothes simple but clean. It was Lucas, crying quietly, unaware of anyone behind him. My heart constricted, tension surged. After 2 years, he was back. Mom froze, hand covering her mouth, tears streaming. Lucas seemed to sense us, turning, his face gaunt but no longer clouded by alcohol. Recognizing Mom and me, he panicked, standing abruptly, instinctively stepping back, eyes evasive. Linda called out, voice trembling but clear enough to stop him. "Don't leave yet. At least stay a little. I don't want you to go like this." Lucas halted, bowing his head low, shoulders trembling slightly. After a moment he spoke, voice hoarse and soft, as if afraid to shatter the silence. "Mom, Dom, I'm sorry. I carry the obsession over Dad's death every day. I know what I caused. Betrayal, hurting everyone, destroying this family. I don't dare ask for forgiveness. I only hope you understand that I truly regret it." He admitted everything, tears streaming, but didn't beg. Just recounted the past 2 years, manual labor, staying away from gambling, living alone to atone. Mom listened silently, neither scolding nor forgiving, just nodding faintly. "I know you've tried to live decently, and I believe it's real. But some losses can't be compensated. You'll carry them for life." Between us was a heavy silence. Wind blew, carrying falling leaves, where we all understood some losses are irreparable, some mistakes indelible, and that family bond, though blood remained, could never return to what it was. No embraces, no grand forgiveness, just silent acknowledgement. Lucas bowed one last time, then turned and walked slowly away from the cemetery, his figure fading behind the headstones. I stood watching, recalling the entire journey. From initial trust when Lucas promised change 3 years ago, to the first betrayal with the house mortgage, anger at discovering the forged sale, loss when my parents lived homeless, conditional help, brief happiness, relapse, and finally Dad's death. Each moment like a knife cut, from hope to despair, love to letting go. The wind blew stronger, leaves swirled around the grave, and I realized not everyone who changes does so to be forgiven. Lucas perhaps had changed, but too late, with too much damage. And not all help should continue forever. Sometimes letting go is the only way to love. The remaining lesson was boundaries. Love doesn't mean unconditional self-sacrifice, and forgiveness isn't required to come with giving someone another chance to hurt you. I learned that through painful years, lonely flights, nights by Dad's grave. The story closed in the cemetery's quiet, where I understood the most important thing I could do for my family was protect those still here, Mom, with her fragile smile, and learn to release what couldn't be saved. We walked home hand in hand. Autumn wind carried new, though small, hope. Life continued with scars as reminders, but also strength to move forward.